to
Thank you, folks, for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment.
the AIAA webinar on psychological safety. My name is Janet Grondin. I'm the chair of the Community Development Working Group, and we do the programming for that working group at AIAA. And this morning, we're pleased to present Amanda Simpson, founder and CEO of Third Segment LLC, and Carlos Pinedo, test flight engineer, leader, innovator, and educator from the 420th Flight Test Squadron at Edwards Air Force Base. And they're going to talk about their experiences with psychological safety and give you some amazing tips on how to use those techniques in your business, academia, work environment. So welcome, everyone, and let's have at it.
All right. Well, thank you, Janet, for the quick intro, and welcome, Carlos. So this is just for those who weren't there. This is kind of a follow-up to a panel that was done at Aviation last year in Las Vegas, and we got a lot of response. So that's why we're having this this webinar today. Hopefully, going a little bit deeper into some of the lessons that are learned and some of the, I won't say tricks of the trade, but things that can be applied to your workplace. And while I'm kind of looking at things from the commercial and business standpoint, Carlos will kind of give his tips from what the Air Force looks at, what the military deals with. So Carlos, you want to kind of just give a quick introduction of what you're working on nowadays?
Yeah, so Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Pinedo, test pilot. I'm actually the senior military test pilot for the new B-21. I'm out here at Edwards Air Force Base. And so happy today to share some insights on how we create high-performing teams in the Air Force, in my experience so far working on what I would consider a very high-performing team here in conjunction with Northrop Grumman, the government and the Air Force on the B-21 program, for which every single mission that we do is high risk. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today.
Thanks. And just for those who don't know me, yes, I'm the CEO and founder of Third Segment, but I've previously been Vice President for Research and Technology at Airbus Americas, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, and then had a long career at Raytheon Missile Systems, where I ran their captive flight test division as well as special projects. So, when I've been a flight instructor for, longer, 5+ years. And one of the things that I used to try to bring to our students was a concept that came from the airlines, which was crew resource management. And for those who aren't familiar with that, CRM stemmed from a variety of different airline accidents where the crews didn't communicate, where there was this, we won't say adversarial, even though that has sometimes been the case, between the pilot and the first officer, the captain and the first officer, where things became overwhelming for one, or the other saw something but didn't feel comfortable talking about it or bringing up as a subject. And that led to fatalities in many cases, or certainly accidents. Carlos, what was the equivalent what the Air Force did?
No, so we do in the Air Force also include now CRM. It's a recurring training for us. And myself, having been a multi-place or a minimum two-pilot aircraft pilot. So most of my time in the Air Force, I've been flying multi-crewed aircraft, in which case they always teach CRM. We do have a variation on CRM when you're talking single seat and your fighter types, because they're doing CRM across formations. versus across cockpit. So it's an annual training. We have to do it, and we go through all of the same major lessons that the airlines learned and included in their training that got brought over to us. And I would say there's lessons that always get relearned. I would love to think that this is no longer a problem. The cockpit and the flight deck is the perfect, most psychologically safe place in the world, and that mission success is always 100%. But as we know, what we hear, whether it's a military aviation incident or on the civilian side, that there are still a lot of work to do in creating sort of that safe environment. But for me, that was probably my first exposure to what I would consider, this is pre-knowing the even term psychological safety, but this idea that I'm going to go to a workplace, this case, a cockpit or a flight deck, where no matter what your rank is, who you are, level of experience, mission success depends on contributions from all team members, right? And you have the space to challenge the rest of the crew, no matter what their rank or experience is. And so, and I learned that through our CRM training, right? That's where it got introduced to us and then reinforced throughout both pilot training, our mission qual training, our aircraft, and throughout the rest of my career.
Yeah, Carlos, you bring up an excellent point, which is we're kind of battling the inherent element of there's a superior and there's a subordinate. And so whether you're in an aircraft or whether you're around a conference table or in a meeting, there's people who are of higher rank, who are higher in the in business, have more massive titles, and then there's going to be junior folks, and that ability for people to share ideas, concepts, even refute concepts that are coming from a superior other employee is difficult, because inherently the people who have made it feel that they their experience, their title, whatever, gives them the right, the authority to dominate a discussion, an environment, and the new person or the junior can be intimidated by that. So the idea of psychological safety, and we have a whole bunch of little quotes and definitions, but it's that ability for anyone in the environment to share and to feel that they can do so without any personal ramifications. And so the question becomes, how do you break that down? Carlos, you said, there is no rank in the cockpit, right? But that's still difficult to overcome.
No, it is. And for those in the audience who haven't heard the term psychological safety, coined in the 90s by Edmondson, I believe Amy Edmondson was the first to use that term. It came out of some work in aviation and in the issues we were having in communicating, and people speaking up and nobody listening to them. And so I'll give a quick definition. I think Amanda summarized it already pretty well, but the sense of being able to show and enjoy oneself without fear of negative consequences to self-image, status, or concern. So that's one. There, like Amanda said, there's a lot of different definitions out there, but they all boil down to the same thing. Can you be yourself? Can you speak up? And what are the consequences for doing so? So in the airplanes, you talk about, we have a couple of mantras. Two that we'll talk about is the halo effect, which is something to be aware of, and the fact that we have the term no rank in the cockpit. Now, we don't take rank off, right? Physically take it off. We verbalize it. So actually in every brief, since you're, as a lieutenant, which is the lowest rank we have of the officer corps here in the Air Force, all the way through now where I'm lieutenant colonel, we always use the term like, hey, rank comes off at the brief, right? So when, we hack the clock, mission starts, we're getting ready to brief, all rank is off, right? So that everybody's now on an equal playing field. We are peers, teammates on a mission to get something done. So one of the big things in psychological safety you have to create first is an inclusive environment, right? A sense of belonging, right? And then you have to demonstrate vulnerability, right? And the ability to like, hey, I'm I can mess up, you can mess up. We need to watch each other's back, and that gets and for us, at least in the Air Force, that gets demonstrated by our superiors, and that's I think why it's so impactful, is that when our instructors mess up, they speak up and they call themselves out, right? And so they do that in the debrief, and they can, you know, if you call them out or ask a question during the brief, you're not immediately shut down. That's actually applauded in many instances for appropriately identifying the error in the brief, if you will, because more often than not, those errors will lead to mission failure. And for us, we're a high consequence business, right? Our missions, whether it's danger to ourselves, which none of us want to put ourselves in danger, or our crewmates in danger, danger to a government asset. The airplane I fly now is many hundreds of millions of dollars. So I definitely want to be a good steward of government money, or the implications of a strike going awry, and it has both national and international security concerns. So the consequences are really high. So I think, to me, two big things that you need to do to begin that no rank in the brief or in the mission is create an inclusive environment, and what we call sometimes a vulnerability loop is often the term used in psychological safety. And for us, it's, you know, rank comes off, where both instructors, people in management or supervisor roles demonstrate the act of being vulnerable and solicit information from their people who work for them and individual team members, and then that gets reinforced.
Yeah, you know, I think about it often in the corporate environment. You know, as a woman, and certainly when I was working my way up, we used to, and I think probably anyone who's listening or have had this happen, whereas potentially a woman says something, it gets, quote, just glossed over in the meeting until a guy brings up exactly the same content, even phrased maybe the same way, and all of a sudden it's a great idea. So that would not be an area of psychological safety. And we're going to talk about there are ways to overcome that, to deal with that. But you know, what we think of in the industrial and the business terms is that there's a pretty good understanding that diverse teams and very inclusive teams make better decisions. The ability to hear ideas and concepts from multiple points of view, and you know, it's the same thing in the cockpit. Everybody has a slightly different perspective on everything that's going on around them, and if they can relate that appropriately to others, that should be respected and quite frankly discussed, as because everybody's viewpoint is a valid viewpoint and might be a unique feature or that can be evaluated and will lead to the betterment of everyone.
Yeah, just to add to a little bit of that, we sometimes classify this could be a workspace or even for us here in our units. Is it a learner environment or is it a performance environment? Right. And so performance-based environments, all people care about are the metrics, the outcomes. They don't care about the people. In which case, failure is often represented as, you know, that famous phrase, failure is not an option. That often happens, right, in those kinds of environments where it's all about the numbers. As long as your numbers are good, I don't care if you're a bad teammate. As long as your numbers are good, I don't care, you know, how you're impacting others around you. And so they'll kind of excuse a lot of poor behavior, whether it's, you know, a moral piece of it or just communication. That's a very different kind of environment than I would say a learner environment, which is where I've seen higher levels of performance. That's sort of, to me, the irony is like, if you can create a learner environment where the thing that's most important is that people are learning, so that people can speak up when they have issues. Those issues are brought up. The whole team benefits from that learning experience, and everybody gets better. And so when you start off with a new team, the learner team might seem like it's performing not as well, right? You're going to hear a lot of mistakes. And oftentimes when we hear that people are making lots of mistakes, we're like, man, this team sucks. And then you take a step back and just wait, and you'll often just see one team just way outperform the other eventually, because it's in a continuous learning state. And so how do you create an environment that's going to allow people to speak up, to learn, and treat failure as being okay? And I would argue that, some industries, space is probably an example of being a learner environment, that they're willing to learn from their mistakes and put themselves out there. The Air Force, inherently through pilot training, and in our brief execution debrief cycle, is a learner cycle. And so as long as everybody's getting better, that's the key aspect of that team. And so you'll see that, and it happens in medicine too, right? So they some really good books out there on creating these high performance teams, and they'll always notice that hospitals that report lots of mistakes and failures and issues, and where people talk to each other, end up having a lot less issues with medical care than those teams that are completely quiet. And that to me is actually a big indicator. Like, how do you know whether your team is a psychologically safe team or not? Is, do you ever hear anybody say, I made a mistake? And do you ever see people both offer and accept help?
Yeah, and certainly a mantra in the military was always, you train as you want to fight, and then you're going to end up fighting the way you have trained. So that's kind of where you're making that transition from a learner to a performer, and how do you bring that learner environment into the performance environment? Because even during the performance, there will be errors. There is that opportunity to learn. So that's kind of a key transition to figure out how to make that even during the performance environment. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's not always easy to do. You're talking about potentially in a cultural change, and a mindset change, and that occurs both at the individual levels. What do you allow yourself to fail at? And that's actually a question that I always ask my boss. So one of the first things, and luckily in the Air Force, we have structured, when you show up to a new job, and we show up to jobs every 2 to 3 years, you have an initial briefing with your commander. There's often some midterm feedback with the commander, and then always an annual appraisal. The very first question that I tell my boss is, what are the expectations? What is the job that he wants me to do? But also is, where am I allowed to fail? And it's a weird way to also say is, where can I actually push either myself or the organization to go, where I'm still going to have your support to continue, right? And so one of the issues I often see is we have a lot of members who are high performing, and they're pushing the envelope. Inevitably, if you push really hard, you're going to fail at something. Some of those ideas are just not going to pan out. And if your supervision or management does not support you when you attempt something really new and fail, all that reinforces is, don't attempt anything new. And then the organization sort of stagnates, because there's no reward for trying and thinking about new innovative solutions. It actually is, reinforced to don't do that, right? The status quo is supreme. So that's oftentimes, and to me, it usually gets like a very weird look of like, well, I don't want you to fail at anything. Like, we have an important job. Like, but what I'm asking is, where can I be creative? What space is available? And I'm asking for two things. Where can I go do this? In what capacity? And second question is, am I going to have your support if I attempt this?
Right. I mean, and you're out at Edwards, you're a test pilot. I mean, you're pushing the edge of the envelope, and that's, I mean, by definition, is to find the edge of the envelope, you have to find where beyond the edge of the envelope is. So failure is not just an option, it's a way to actually define what the limitations of this case in the aircraft and of the crew to perform that duty. So failure has to be part of your environment, and we don't think about that as much on the commercial industrial side, to understand that if you're developing a new product, if you're working on a team or a production system, to understand that you want to be in whether it's continuous improvement process, that you have to understand what you're improving, you're testing what can be done, and you need to understand that sometimes you have to go a little bit beyond that to find out where your limitations are, and maybe then try something different.
Yeah, for us, growth only happens, and here growth, I'm talking about specifically personal, individual growth, as well as the aircraft. Where we're at right now in our test campaign, B-21 is brand new. Every flight we're going to the unknown, right? So we're literally growing the envelope out. And to me, it's an interesting analogy to a personal life where growth only happens when you go stress it, when you take it to something that you haven't done before. I often try to do that in my own personal life, is to, attempt and do things that I don't have 100% guarantee of success. That can be anxious and stressful at times. So that's where I think creating a psychologically safe environment, meaning that the repercussions for failing at those states, the ability to go out and attempt these things, and then to bring those lessons back to the team, are supported, right? And so that's where, to me, that's one of the reasons why those teams who have high levels of psychological safety end up performing really well, is because individual team members are continuously pushing themselves and the organization to get better, with support from the unit itself or their supervision and or their peers. That's another big key component that we haven't yet talked about.
So I think one of the things that we really want to focus on in this session is, so how do we create that environment? So if you're a leader, right, you're the supervisor, you're the, the left seater, how do you create that environment when you have a subordinate, a co-pilot, or even just a team, that there are people that don't feel comfortable making a contribution where they could fail, or they want them to feel safe to express their opinion? How do you make those first steps to create that environment?
Yeah, so to me, it's slightly different depending on what role you play in the organization they're in. For us, again, the levels what I look at is how safe an environment is, psychologically safe an environment is, first, is it an inclusive environment, right? Do people feel like they're part of the team? And do they have space to talk, right? That's what makes it an inclusion. And that's the first step. The other one is, do they have space to grow and or learn? Do you have space to create value? Do they think they're creating value for the organization and contribute? And how are those contributions being recognized? And then lastly, is there space to challenge the status quo? And so you have to actively create a culture that has all four of those things to have a psychologically safe environment. And it has to be true for everybody in your organization. And I think that's where we sometimes fail, is some people, like, once you get to a manager, supervisor, or high level senior manager, oh, you get to contribute, learn, be inclusive, and challenge. But the people below you, oh, they don't get to challenge, right? They do get to learn. And that's not quite a fully inclusive environment and psychologically safe. So having those four elements at every level really helps. So what does that mean if you're at the top looking down? Is being able to listen, right? So depending on your meetings and how those are structured, one thing I've seen well is that, whether it's everybody contributes at the meeting, whether you're never the first to speak or the last to talk. I have a big issue with this. I love talking, and my friends will give me a lot of grief for always being, in every single meeting, I'm the last person to summarize what I'm thinking. It's mainly to help myself remember what the hell we just talked about for an hour. But allowing other people to contribute in those settings. So at whatever level. For us in the Air Force, we do it a little bit differently. Is we force people into that contributor, challenger, those higher levels of psychological safety by design in their job, right? And so we'll put people in those positions to challenge. And so we will ask them to do that continuously. They're put in front of their peers. It often will start at the peer level, right? So able to challenge your peers, and that helps build that habit before you start challenging others. And so we sort of work through that throughout your career. And so the fact that people at senior levels are demonstrating all four characteristics, the fact that you practice at your level kind of builds that overall culture and habit, so that as you move up through the organization, you inherently believe all four of these things are true and are capable. Now, that does change. I won't say that the Air Force and the government is not entirely perfect. I've been in Air Force organizations where you're kind of told to, shut up and color, as we like to say. And so those tend to not work as well or be as high performing as those other teams I've seen who do a really good job of exhibiting all four of those stages at every level of position.
Yeah, and you
I
have
think
to
for-
color. You have to color within the lines too.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I mean, as a leader, that listening skill, right? The ability to listen, not just hear the person, but listen and understand what we used to call, and I suppose still call, active listening, so that you're not listening to find how you can interject or how you can respond, but to hear what that person is saying and let that sink in. And for a leader to be able to hear around the room, not just audibly, but to look visually and see the comfortableness, body language to determine who feels uncomfortable and how to draw them out. And that's a unique leadership skill that has to be developed over time so that everyone has all the things that you talked about, that the environment feels safe. Um, and that's not easy, but it's the role of a leader to make that happen.
Yeah, and we do, and I brought this up last time at the panel. One of the things that I liked, and this is a Zappos thing, I didn't come up with this, for those who are familiar with that company and how they operate, but they often talk about, at least the CEO talks about creating these communication collisions, right? And the fact that, if you can create within your organization multiple avenues for which people of varieties of levels are constantly communicating, that has a lot of energy, right? That is, if you use the same analogy of molecules hitting each other, the more of these molecules as people interact, the more energy your organization has, the more energy it has available to exhibit change or perform. And so often see that too with different high performing teams. Low performing teams, nobody's talking. There are no collisions. It's about a stagnant of organizations. Like there's no water cooler talk. It may be, and it may be not that they don't want to, is that we as an organization or by facilities in the government, we have some very old buildings and not great cubicle structure. We tend to isolate everybody. Well, how do you create that naturally? Like, how do you create places for people to talk so that they feel like they're one team, give themselves opportunities to learn from each other, provide informal avenues to contribute, because not everybody is going to feel comfortable in that larger meeting setting to contribute. If you just call out every single individual and say like, hey, what do you have to say? More often than not, you're going to get a lot of, I don't have anything to report, boss, right? Because that's a lot of pressure to perform in that sense. And so one thing that I like to do when I enter an organization is see what kind of communication collisions are we occurring and how do I increase that number? We do that in the Air Force a couple of different ways. One is a lot of socializing that occurs. We have oftentimes what we call a roll call where we get all the air crew together. A lot of socializing in that period of time, connections to history, good songs, beverage of your choice. But what that does, and we joke that most of the good ideas, and this has been true, I think, for aerospace engineering in general, all happen in a bar over a napkin, right? And just having those conversations. And so one thing we look at is, well, how can we recreate that kind of experience throughout the work week and at different intervals throughout the year, right? Or any project that we're working on. And so to me, that ends up being a key aspect to allow more people to contribute. Another one that I like.
I would add to that one of the keys there is that you're not just relating on a business level, right? You're learning those interpersonal connections. You're learning about the person that you're talking to. You're learning about what makes them tick. What are their interests? What's their family? And as you do that, they become more comfortable with you. You become more comfortable with them, and that opens up and creates that safe and or more safe environment. So the more you do that, just beyond communicating for business purposes or for mission success. And I think that's one of the issues that we certainly saw develop during the pandemic as people became more isolated. They weren't having those collisions other than around a virtual connection when there was a specific topic to be dealt with. So sorry to burst in.
No, exactly right. And so there are a lot of reasons that we'll see these things break down, and you'll see the impact on our organization pretty quick, right? Whether it was something like COVID, where we're forced apart. It could be just naturally just building structure, right? Where you move a team. And for anybody who's ever worked in a place for a long time, asking somebody to leave their cubicle that has been their home for 10 years or 15 years to move somewhere else, that could be a very large and emotional kind of endeavor, right? Just to try to create more avenues of communication. And understanding too, you know, that people tend to demonstrate different introvert, extrovert kind of personalities. This is not meant to create a bunch of extroverts in an organization. To me, it's more of a, not everybody wants to do the contribution and the challenge or part of psychological safety in public. And so you have to create and or will not themselves go out of their way to do that in private. And so I like to create an environment where that's just happening in both public and private settings and remove all of the obstacles to get to those higher stages of psychological safety. And it's a challenge because it's something that requires continuous upkeep and continuous observation of your team. For instance, on our team, when I fly a mission, there's only 2 of us in the airplane. That's not classified. It's a 2-place airplane. But in the control room, engineer-wise, there's 60 people. And we work very closely with our test conductors and test directors. Well, the team was split by floors, right? So pilots were up here on the 2nd floor with the beautiful view of the flight line, and the engineers were down in the bottom. And I'm like, well, we got to interact all the time. And you saw some teammates continuously walking back and forth. And we're like, well, that's a lot of burden on that one person. And then that information needs to get disseminated across 2 teams. So we knocked that off and put everybody in one on the same floor. The execution team for test is on one floor. So when engineers talk to engineers about execution, pilots are nearby and you can hear it, right? I'll just literally walk around the corner and join that conversation and vice versa. And that has led to, again, an increase in this communication collisions across disciplines on our team for execution, and has only helped improve both the dissemination of information, which can be a challenge for us in a classified environment. We don't have cell phones that we can text each other, or Slack for that instance, or any other modern tool to talk when you're in the vault. And so that has really helped our team out. And that was just a simple restructuring that we did. And you get to hear 2 things that I heard come out of it. Is one is laughter, right? So the team is now happier that we're multidisciplined. You would have, potentially you would have thought a floor full of pilots would have been a rowdy floor. It was actually a very quiet floor when it was just pilots. And then we brought in our other teammates, and now it's a super rowdy floor. Why? Because we're a higher performing team. Everybody's happier themselves personally. Everybody's performing at their level. Everybody feels like they're included as part of the team. Our engineers wear a flight suit. So when we talk about being inclusive, sports do this, right? It's the wearing of the uniform. They look just like us. So there's no try to minimize the amount of tribalness between types of person in the organization. So removing all those obstacles and putting everybody together has only led to a higher performing team.
Yeah, and those are things that the team can come up with, leadership can impose. If you are that, I talked about the woman who at the table who comes up with the idea that no one responds to, and then gets repeated by the guy, and it's best thing since sliced bread. If you're that person, right, and you don't feel that the environment is safe, right, the leader isn't creating that kind of environment. How do you take steps if you're down below and you want to create that safe environment for yourself, but also for your peers?
Yeah, so that can always be a challenging environment, right? So when I talk to some of my siblings who work in different civil sectors, they just leave, right? They're like, hey, this environment sucks. And they're like, I can't change. Yeah. And they will walk out, right? And it is something that we're conscious of ourselves that, I don't know if it's true or not, but the mantra we use is that people quit because of management or organization, right? So like it's the leaders in the organization that people are leaving. It's not the mission. And for us, that's the point, is like, hey, why is it that we often see people leave when there seems to be high sense of purpose? They're impacting national security in the work that they're doing. And this, I think, is true across the DoD and aerospace, that we have high purpose, high impact projects that oftentimes leaders are like, well, these should be giving people a lot of value. They should be happy to work here. But we haven't created an environment that makes them feel at all like they're part of the team. And it's this piece here. So the thing that I've done when I've been in places where you've seen sort of a disconnect between what leadership is creating as a culture, is what I started to do is I create a mini culture, right? I don't know if people have heard, sort of red ocean and a blue ocean, or blue ocean or red ocean business sense, but create something unique about your small team and where you have influence, or start to get some of your peers together to work through this cycle where maybe you may not feel included in the larger organization your division, or however you guys are set up. And the reason I say that is the times that I've done that I'm like, you know what, let me get 3 or 4 of us together, where we're going to create this inclusive, we're going to learn from each other, see contributions rise, right? So I kind of create my own little mini formation within the organization, because what ends up happening is you start performing, right? And what that tells me, when you have that kind of conflicting leadership style, is that's a performance-based organization. What they care about the numbers, right? So I'll go and I'll go, okay, I'll play your game. Let me create a small, mini, high-performing team for which the numbers will stand out eventually, because it's just going to perform better. And so then it'll rise, and they'll go like, oh, how did you do that? I'm like, oh, these are the things that we did on our team that led to our success. And sometimes the light bulb will go off on management or supervision, be like, let's create more teams like that, because they're getting results done. And that team seems happy and nobody's leaving.
Yeah, and that bubble that you've created starts getting larger and larger as more people want to become part of
Correct.
this high-performing organization. Yeah, I had an experience, we're talking almost 25 years ago now, where I had some issues at work because of my transition, and I wasn't getting assignments, and people weren't working for me. And I finally, they gave me a team to manage on a project. Actually, they gave me a project, and I recruited a team, and we made sure that was a high-performing team. And over the course of the next couple of years of that project, we accomplished some things that, quite frankly, management, even our customer, thought was impossible, with a ridiculously small budget. And we just took on this incredible project. And all of a sudden people are like, wow, we want to be part of that. And how do we, share this so that others can do the same thing, whether it's other teams or take the project that Amanda's running. Let's make this bigger because it's so successful. And so success begets success. If you're, and I'm going to go back to that example I brought up. If you're that woman who then some guy repeats the idea, maybe it's upon you to speak up and say, thank you, Bob, for let's leverage what I had said earlier, because we can snowball that and come up with something, right? So you get the credit, and also let others know that you feel the ownership of that idea. But then if you're a third party, you talked a little bit about the third party, who would then say, great, thank you, Bob, for bringing up what Janet had talked about earlier, right? So that the credit goes not only to the person who had been, we'll say, disenfranchised, but it shows that they feel the need to give that person that psychological safety, to give that person the support, that their idea was not, wasted. That it only was good when, in this case, Bob spoke up and said something supportive. I think those are kind of things that start building those bubbles that will get recognized as, bringing the psychological safety into the small micro group that can then grow over time.
Yeah, and that exact example that you provided, I've seen, at least in 2 instances separated by 10 years. So, bomber test unit, we're doing radar testing. The lead radar engineer happens to be a female engineer, brilliant engineer. She's still working out here at Edwards. Every time she spoke up to answer a question related to the radar testing that we're about to do, somebody else would interrupt, not in that discipline, and provide input. Oh, I think we should do this. And then it happened 2 or 3 times. And this is a big room. There's multiple disciplines are in there. And radar wasn't the only thing we were doing on that flight mission or that test mission. It was just the big priority. That was the priority test. And so the aircrew were there, and I just turned and said, well, why don't we just let the radar engineer answer the radar questions first, or something to that effect, as you're saying, like the third party. And we did have a discussion as a team later about, and this is one of the things I have for like when you're observing a team is who gets to speak and when, and who gets to listen. And so I've seen that happen there. Chief engineer on the other side, who's in a position as a chief engineer, but has less experience than some of her peers. Same thing happened, right? She is this is a meeting she has called. She's the lead for the meeting, organizing across 2, big organizations, our test engineering division and our test operations division, and just being walked all over the entire time. Every time, a decision needs to get made, that is technically her job to make that decision. She would either voice a decision and it'd be treated as a suggestion, and not as a direction. And so what I thought happened well there is that the test engineering lead happened to also be female, just by happenstance, also a brilliant engineer that we have on our team. So she spoke up and she said, no, that wasn't a suggestion. She's the chief engineer. We as a team are not responsible for making that decision. She is. We're going to go do that, what she said, right? And so, and to me, it's interesting to see that I've yet to see in a team that turn a team sour. People are like, oh yeah, and it's sometimes hard. Like to put people in their place, if you will, depending on how it's said, where it's said. And for me, there's oftentimes too that helps is those of us in supervisor manager positions, a little bit of a follow-up with any of these individuals in this on this team on a private setting to help deal with any kind of immediate emotional response that they may have. But what I have is most people in my team, we are mission focused, right? Like, hey, let's just get better. So if you're calling me out on something that I'm doing that I don't recognize that I'm doing, and that's half the time that I've seen this occur, is they don't know that they're doing that. They don't know that they're always interrupting these people. And they will often go like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was doing that. And so I haven't seen it be that big of a problem to have either the direct manager speak up or a third party intercede. And that to me is also an indicator of a good psychologically safe environment is where you're never alone, right? And you couldn't call a team inclusive if everybody's an individual with no mutual support. That is not an inclusive environment. So having that mutual support at the peer level and the supervisor level, I think is very key as well.
Yeah, and that also is sometimes the reminder to folks in the room to move out of that performer environment, maybe back into the learner environment, that they've missed something, and that someone, whether they're personally called out or they're another third party, fourth party, whatever in the room, and go, oh, that didn't occur to me. I missed that. Maybe I need to be a bit more observant in the future. I do want to remind people we're kind of in the last few minutes of the webinar. If you have questions, please click on the Q&A button on your screen and put them into the question and answer block so that we can see what your questions are. Yeah, so let's see, I got a note actually. Yeah. Anyway, so do you think your leadership style has changed over the years, Carlos, as psychological safety, as you become more aware of that as a
it has, and I think it started from I saw what a good performing aircrew team looked like. And that's both, either within my own airplane or across a formation. And I've been on good aircrew teams and I've been on bad aircrew teams. And that's, I spent most of my 20s flying combat missions in Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. So a lot of time in high stress environments where you're making quick decisions. You don't have 100% of the information and high consequence for those decisions. And so I got to see kind of real time when you're in that kind of environment, the benefit of a good team and the impact that a bad team would have. And some of the challenges to try to get bad teams. And that was, by the time I deployed on the third time as an instructor, well, now it's my responsibility to turn, I would get all the young guys or the bad apples or the people who need changing. And so to me, it started there. And then as I moved up in the Air Force, and now I'm, not just managing aircrew members, but being part of larger organizations and teams. Our team in the B-21, the organization is over 700 people. That's way larger than a squadron that would only have about 100. And now we're across different organizations. So instead of being all military, how do we manage and lead teams that now have teammates from across the full spectrum of organizations that all have their own independent culture? So I've seen my style change, sort of leveraging what I learned in flight for that environment. Because if you can perform under pressure in a time of war, there's almost no business meeting that I've had that has that kind of pressure in it, right? And so that has helped out a lot. And I think for me, it's also changed a little bit with what kind of job that I have and who am I responsible for, and to go to shift my own mindset from being individually performance focused, which is where I think I was in my youth, where I wanted my, the value of me was the performance that I would provide, the outcome, and to shift it towards a learner focused environment where the two P's are people and purpose. So I try to ensure that we are people focused and they're learning, and ensuring that everybody understands the purpose for why they're here. So that has changed. So performance just happens to fall out now after focusing on people and purpose.
Yeah, I know that over my career, I've learned to speak out more, and when bullied, and I have been, to, I don't want to say just ignore it, but to understand what would be the next step. I had a particular instance, this goes back about 20 years or so. I was running a test campaign, and there was a lot of stuff going on, and I was running behind on putting together the plans for this particular flight test program. And I was dismissed from the project because the program manager didn't approve of my pace. He wanted to go faster, and I wanted to move carefully as we push the boundaries of the envelope. I was so upset that and this is the first time ever that I've lost a job. I just got reorganized in the company. I didn't really lose a job, but I was excused from this program, that I kind of sulked for one day. And during that day, that manager went off and flew the flight profile that I would not approve, single pilot, and killed himself because he wanted to do something that was well outside the envelope. And I felt that we needed to not only get some safety devices put on the aircraft, like parachutes and quick release doors, but also not go that far outside the envelope, because I didn't. And this was literally not only a psychological safety on my part, but a physical safety on everyone else's part. I didn't speak up to the next level and say, we should shut this down, because there is a risk, not just to the company and to the program, but to a life. And by the way, that program was shut down immediately. So because the customer said, hey, we can't deal with this. So I mean, these things get to be personal. And I didn't have that safe environment. So I've learned that, I don't want to say I'm bulletproof, but I don't care anymore. Of course, I'm self-employed now, but
Mhm.
you need to be able to say, you know what, I have an issue and I'm going to speak up about it, even if it's not safe, because that is important enough to move forward. And it's incumbent upon leadership to recognize that importance, that without shutting someone down.
Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing that. Like I said, aerospace is a high consequence environment, right? And so like the consequence of not listening to those that we should listen to can have severe implications, right? Here, loss of life. And there are many instances of that repeating itself, that story repeating itself. And that's why I say, this isn't something we have figured out, both on government and the civil side, that we continue to struggle with creating this, inclusive learner contributor challenger environment. We are under, in my program, under tremendous schedule pressure to get capability out to the warfighter. And that pressure is not just from the program office, but also individual. We know that it matters a lot to national security to get an asset like ours out to the warfighter, right? It changes the capabilities that our government can employ for diplomacy, even as a deterrent. And so we put that pressure on ourselves.
Yeah, and in the situation I talked about, the manager was a recent Air Force retiree, felt that he had more experience. I'm the gal on the project. We're working with a small general aviation aircraft, which I had more experience, but he had flown, heavy military aircraft, blah blah blah. So he dismissed my idea, even though I was more experienced in that particular capacity. Someone has put a question in, which is similar to what I talked about, which is when you don't have the inspectors, you have safety engineers and others, how do they get the respect of being able to say, there's an issue? What comes in mind to me is go read the Challenger accident report, right? Where people said, no, do not launch this spacecraft. And they were ignored because, the importance of the mission. You're not sure, and you're not the engineer who does, et cetera, et cetera. And what changes NASA implemented into their decision process, the ability of anyone to say no go. Yet after all that, they still had the Columbia incident where people did see what had happened on the foam falling off the tank, and in that particular time hitting the wing, and they didn't have the ability to react in time, and lost yet a second air vehicle and crew, right? And crew. And I think, as many people know, that probably led to the eventual cancellation of that entire program. And
yeah, we do. Yeah, and in our organization, we do knock it off drills, right? So as part of training, like I said, it's two of us in the airplane. It's 50 plus engineers in the control room, all looking at the respective data for their discipline. And thing that we reiterate through training is that any single one of those engineers sees something wrong and they call a knock it off, it's no questions asked, right? I will perform certain actions. We will discuss, potentially debrief what caused it, but there's no questioning of the reason for that. And the hardest thing actually to do is not to convince the team to agree to the knock it off. It's getting young members who see something wrong to speak up, because now they have to, the program has a lot of pressure on it. And so for us, we start to build that in from training, right? So we go through that drill over and over and over again. And so to me, it's, how do we build knock it off drills in our organizations? How do we create environments that allow members to speak up at their level, to get feedback on how they provide that in order to contribute. And if I will here, we got a few minutes, is to a little bit to your story you shared there, Amanda, is the learner contributor loop. Is how do we create an environment where contributions are coming from all directions and learning is happening two ways. So one of the key things, lessons for me that I often tell, or mantras, is like, you can learn from anyone. There is something to be learned from every. So if you approach every individual with, oh, I bet there's something that I can learn from you. And that's how you treat your organization, no matter if it's a brand new hire or someone that's been there for a long time. That's generally my first thing that I do in an organization is go learn from the old guys. Where have we been? What have we done? What are lessons learned that I don't want to repeat? For the new guys, I'm like, hey, what are things that we're not thinking about? And so I purposely attempt to learn and to allow people to teach me things at every level. And that usually does two things. One is I just get smarter because I'm never the smartest person in the room. And two, it builds this practice of like, oh, no matter what level you are at, you have something of value to contribute.
Right. And then and everyone needs to, and you've recognized to be a lifelong learner. That there's always something that you don't know about that you could know more. And back to the discussion of no-go, I used to think of the phrase, it's far better to be on the ground wishing that you were in the air than to be in the air wishing you were on the ground. So
yeah, the other mantra we sometimes ask them to say is, what makes me a good pilot is I never put myself in a position to have to be a great one. And so that's also the one. Okay, like let's make sure that we're doing this the correct way the first time. And I will say, you shared a story, and I think we got many of these. Why is this whole thing important? Like, why are we here talking about it? And you said we have some personal stories as well. One big thing for myself is Mexican immigrant in the U.S. military. And I would say in every organization that I've been in, at every step, I've always had to defend why myself as an immigrant would choose to serve in the U.S. And so what that did is, when I was challenged as a young lieutenant, that sort of informed me, like, the message that I got is, don't be Mexican, right? You're being too Mexican. This is the U.S. military. And so being Mexican is not just a national identity, but there's a cultural component to it. So an easy thing is, how would I pronounce my name? So would I introduce myself as Carlos? I have no accent in English. I also have no accent in Spanish. So I learned at a very young age, like, oh, there were repercussions for being me as a young pilot. And so I would just say Carlos in a very English accent. And it took me quite a long time to be okay with being very Mexican, culturally Mexican, in this space, where now I pronounce my name Carlos like it's like the name that I was actually given. And so even that simple act of how I pronounce my name, how I show up as myself, and part of it, I realized that a lot of what was happening was not intentional. Some of it was by ignorance. And so having, giving other people a little bit of grace, allowing myself to create space, and then having managers, leaders, peers who provided that safe space for me has now allowed me to be my full self, even at my position. Now, I am granted that I have a high enough rank that if somebody did feel uncomfortable, they, again, we go back to, depending on what space we're at, whether young lieutenants will speak up to me or not. But for the most part, understanding that, that experience for me is one of the reasons that started me down this path as well. How do I ensure that doesn't happen to the next person? That the next young lieutenant who comes from whatever background that they have, that they feel like they can represent and present themselves in the workplace, and that their choice to serve isn't questioned just because of either the color of their skin, their background, gender, or sex. Because for us,
yeah, we're unfortunately out of time, but I think, and Janet will come on in here in a moment, but I think the important thing is we need to continue having these discussions around psychological safety, whether it's on the flight deck, whether it's in the workplace, or even in the personal space, and how important it is for our personal safety, our our environment, but also for our companies and for our careers. So, Janet?
That was amazing. And aren't we just so lucky to have Amanda and Carlos with us today with the support of AIAA for this webinar. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. You know, I was on the side texting with an employee. I said, this is how I want our company to run. So you've really laid out what we should be all striving for in our community. And I just, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for doing this today. And for the audience, thank you for being with us. I hope everybody has a great day and a great 4th of July. So thanks, everyone.